I'm kind of a, well, I was going to say I'm kind of a bottom line guy, and which is actually not very true. When I'm talking, I'm not so much a bottom line guy. When I'm listening, I kind of want to get to the bottom line, and this is just a character flaw in me, and I take a little comfort in the fact that it's also a pretty broadly accepted male characteristic. Well, the Hebrew writer gets to the bottom line in the first verse of what we have as Hebrews chapter 8. Now, the main point of what we are saying is this. All right, there we go. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by a human being. In other words, Jesus is our high priest. And it's bigger than that in this sense. He is our perfect high priest. And he continues to do his priestly work. I think it's at least something to take a look at here, that he sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. Okay, what's that all about? Well, in first century thinking, to sit at the right hand of the throne was the next most powerful thing to sitting on the throne itself. I'm a Trinitarian, and I imagine you are too, meaning that I believe the Godhead is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Trinity. In Hebrew thought, God the Father was I don't know how to say it, not just the primary, but the head. And then the Son and the Spirit were co-equals, and yet it gets a little fuzzy there, but that God was on the throne. When Stephen was murdered and martyred, he said he saw Jesus standing at the right hand of the throne. And here we have Jesus who is seated at the right hand of the throne. This is an indication of the authority and power of Jesus, and that he serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord. This is an allusion to the heaven, where God sets this tabernacle up, not human hands. Well, on one level, this is a look into eternity. Verse 3, every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, and so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. Okay? I mean, that's just a logical progression. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already priests who offer the gifts prescribed by the law. And boy, there were lots of gifts. Maybe not lots, but there was quite a list of gifts and offerings that were prescribed by the law. In verse 5, they serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. Okay, now we're talking about this tabernacle where Jesus serves. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. But in fact, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs, these priests, as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. Now, at the beginning here of this talk about covenants, we should probably spend at least a couple of minutes thinking about what is the difference between a contract and a covenant. Well, let's first talk about how they are similar. Number one, they're both binding, and they rest on promises that are made. A contract is more of a document. It documents the promise made and the conditions of the promise. Okay. A covenant is, at least this, much more personal. A covenant is as deep or high a promise as I can make. And it's not a legal binding, but it is a personal binding. That this covenant doesn't need legal teeth, because it's much beyond a legal contract. It's a contract and, well, as you can see or you can hear, I can't fully explain a covenant, but in the Jewish culture, you did not make contracts. You made covenants. One of the things in our culture that I believe has to be done on the basis of covenant is marriage. It's not just a binding legal commitment. It is a covenant that goes beyond legality. All right. Well, verse 6, in fact, the ministry Jesus has received is superior to theirs, as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. Well, what are the promises? Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the earth. That would be one. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. That would be another. If I go to prepare a place for you, I will bring you there with me. That's a promise. The promises of Jesus are the basic content of the covenant with us. The Old Covenant, which is represented in the Old Testament, what we have as the Old Testament, or Andy Stanley's right. He says for the Jew, that was the Bible. These are represented in at the beginning, the 10 Commandments, and then they were fleshed out to be about 360 individual commands, which there's two functions of that. For the Hebrew, the first function was obeying these commandments gives me a connection to God. My access to God is through my obedience and mediated by the priests. Okay. I guess the promise would be, if you do these things and make these sacrifices and offerings, then there is this connection to God. We have better promises, because on the basis of the grace of God, through Jesus, we have full access to God. And there are dozens of other ways that the promises of this covenant are better than the promises of the old covenant. In verse 7, for if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. In other words, what was the flaw of the law? I just made a poem. The flaw of the law was that we are incapable of keeping it perfectly. Only one did, and that was Jesus. And can we be without sacrilege? And can we agree he had a little bit of a leg up on that since he was God in the flesh? The rest of us are just flesh in the flesh, and we don't keep the entire law just as Jesus did. Well, so the reason the law, well, what he said, the writer says, he said, if there was nothing wrong with the first covenant, implying there was something wrong with it. What was wrong with it was us. No place would have been sought for another. And so, move on, verse 8. But God found fault with the people. See, that was the problem with the law. It's humans. And this is what God said. And verse 8 continues. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. This was a prophecy. A new covenant, a new agreement was going to come. Verse 9, it will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Pardon me. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. It's beautiful. The prophecy came from Jeremiah, centuries before Jesus came and the new covenant was established. That verse 13, by calling this covenant new, he's made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. Obsolete and outdated covenants can be discarded. So, I'm coming down to, the bottom line thing I talked about. Here's how I see it. The old covenant was not bad, but it was impossible to fulfill because of our humanity. And now, a new covenant, which is not based on our ability to conform to it and obey it. It's based on God's grace, the grace of Christ, to solidify our connection and relationship with Him. And I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more. I love that, because I got a lot of junk that needs forgiving. I bet you do too. Well, time's up. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie.